Emma Watson had chosen the small, rustic cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city for its cozy ambiance. The warm, golden light of the hanging lamps gave the room a serene glow, and the faint hum of soft jazz created an inviting atmosphere. Outside, the streets were damp from a light drizzle, the kind that made people rush past, their umbrellas bobbing like colorful mushrooms. Inside, however, the world seemed to slow down. As she sipped her cappuccino, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. Her life, though glamorous on the surface, often felt like a whirlwind of obligations, flights, and public appearances. Yet here, in this little cafe, she could simply be herself, a woman with thoughts, doubts, and aspirations beyond the screen. Her notebook lay open on the table, the pages filled with ideas for her advocacy projects. Lately, a gnawing question had been haunting her. Am I truly making a difference, or am I just another celebrity trying to ease my guilt? Emma's pen hovered over the page as her mind wandered. She thought about the refugee camps she'd visited, the women she'd spoken to, and the stories of resilience that had left her simultaneously inspired and heartbroken. But for every success, there were countless others she couldn't help. Was she doing enough? The soft chime of the cafe door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, instinctively observing the newcomer. A man stepped inside, shaking droplets of rain from his worn coat. His boots left wet footprints on the wooden floor, and his gray beanie was pulled low over his forehead. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, as though life's blows hadn't yet extinguished his fire. Emma's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than usual. She had a habit of watching people, imagining their stories, and wondering about the lives they lived beyond these brief glimpses. What brought him here today? What weighed on his mind? The man, Henry, scanned the room and sighed when he realized the only available seat was across from Emma. For a moment, he hesitated, but practicality won over. He approached her table. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. Emma smiled warmly. "Of course, go ahead." As Henry settled into the chair, Emma noticed the subtle lines of weariness etched into his face. His hands, rough and calloused, cradled the coffee cup as though it were a lifeline. She wondered what kind of work had left his hands in such a state. "You seem like you have a lot on your mind," Emma said, breaking the silence. Henry snorted softly, his lips twitching into a faint, sardonic smile. "Isn't that obvious?" Emma's curiosity deepened. There was a story here. She could feel it. "Sometimes talking helps," she offered, her tone gentle. Henry looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Talking, huh? You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Emma replied, her voice steady. He hesitated, as though weighing whether she was worth the effort. Finally, he leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "All right, I used to work at a factory. Good, honest work. Then they shut it down, said it was cheaper to move overseas, lost my job, and with it, my wife. She couldn't handle the pressure, left me with 2 kids to raise and no plan. Now, every day's a fight to keep the lights on." Emma listened intently, her cappuccino forgotten. His words painted a vivid picture of struggle and resilience, a world so different from hers, and yet in some ways painfully familiar. "That sounds incredibly hard," she said softly. "I'm sorry you've had to go through all that." Henry shrugged, his bitterness barely masked. "Yeah, well, sorry doesn't fix anything." Emma tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "No, it doesn't, but understanding might." Henry let out a hollow laugh. "Understanding? From you? Look at you. Fancy coat, fancy coffee, probably some fancy car parked outside. People like you don't get it. You think writing a check solves everything." The accusation stung, but Emma didn't shy away. "You're right. I can't fully understand what you've been through, but that doesn't mean I don't care. And for the record," she added with a wry smile, "I walked here." Henry blinked, caught off guard by her candor. For the first time, his posture softened slightly. As their conversation unfolded, Emma found herself thinking about the barriers that divided them, not just socioeconomic ones, but the assumptions and prejudices that came with them. She wondered how many times she had been dismissed or judged based on her appearance, her fame, or her wealth. She thought about the countless interviews where her words had been twisted, the causes she championed reduced to headlines. But here, in this moment, she wasn't an actress or an activist. She was just a person trying to connect with another person. Henry's story stayed with her long after he left. She sat there, staring at her notebook, her pen poised but unmoving. His words echoed in her mind. "Understanding doesn't pay the bills." Was he right? Was all her effort just a band-aid on a wound too deep to heal? Or could empathy and connection truly create change? By the time Emma left the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. She clutched her notebook tightly, ideas already forming about how to turn this fleeting encounter into something meaningful. As she walked, she resolved to dig deeper, not just into her advocacy, but into herself. What more could she do? How could she amplify voices like Henry's? For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a spark of clarity. Change wouldn't come overnight, but maybe, just maybe, it could start with a single conversation. Every story holds the power to inspire change. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can make a difference.